I need you to understand, first of all, that the man I was no longer exists, but I still smell him. The smell of hatred, a metallic and sour odor that seemed to permeate my skin, my beard, my clothes. I was a man of rules. I grew up in Kerman, and my life was shaped by rigid tradition, a devotion that allowed no shadows or doubts. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that I was doing what was right. Zeal was my identity. When my leaders entrusted me with the task of dealing with the small group that met secretly in the back of an old carpentry shop, I felt pride. I didn't see them as people. I saw them as a disease, a stain that needed to be cleansed. The word Christian was an insult to me, a betrayal of the one true God. And I, Omar, would be the instrument of that cleansing. I was at peace with what I was going to do. I desired to do it. The idea that they hid like rats to practice their forbidden faith fed a cold, righteous anger within me. Before we continue, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you don't miss any testimonies, and leave in the comments where you are listening to us from. It's very important to have you participating in this community. Now, let's get back to the testimony. The night it all happened was still. There was no wind. The air was heavy, dense. I and two men who shared my conviction walked through the narrow dirt streets, and the only sound was our footsteps. We said nothing. We didn't need to. The silence was filled by our mission. I carried the gallon of gasoline, and its weight in my hand felt correct. It felt like the weight of justice. The smell of the fuel leaked a little, strong and chemical, and I inhaled it as if it were incense. I felt focused. Every detail of the plan went through my head. Soak the back door, the old wooden side walls, ensure there was no escape route. I didn't think about the lives inside. I only thought about the task. I was so blinded by my own righteousness that I couldn't see the darkness I myself carried. I was about to commit mass murder in the name of God, and my heart was absolutely calm. When we arrived at the alley behind the carpentry shop, a faint light was leaking through the cracks of the ill-fitting door. And then I heard it. It was voices. They were singing. A low, soft song, but to me, it sounded like a scream of defiance. That sealed their fate in my mind. The anger that was cold turned hot. A heat rose up my chest and burned my throat. How dared they? There, hidden, defying all that was sacred? I looked at my companions and nodded. We began the work. The sound of the liquid being poured onto the dry wood was almost a relief. I made sure the gasoline soaked the base of the door well, creating an impassable barrier. I wanted to be sure the fire would do its job quickly. I had my face covered with a cloth, but my eyes were fixed on the wood. I could only think of one thing: purification. I took the matchbox from my pocket. My hands were steady. I wasn't shaking. I struck the match. The small flame appeared, and for an instant, it lit up the eyes of my companions. They also seemed eager. I didn't hesitate. I threw the lit match onto the gasoline-soaked ground. What followed wasn't an ignition, it was an explosion. A guttural whoosh that pushed the hot air against my face, making me stagger backward. The fire shot up instantly, not in yellow flames, but in a vibrant blue and orange wall, licking the old wood with terrifying speed. The sound was a roar, a living sound, and immediately the singing inside stopped. It was replaced by screams, screams of panic, screams of terror. I heard the name Jesus being shouted, not in worship, but in desperation. And I, standing there, feeling the infernal heat on my face, smiled. I was watching my victory. But something was wrong. The fire was growing too large, higher than the building, and the light began to change. The fire wasn't just burning, it was behaving in a way I had never seen. The flames rose straight to the sky like a solid pillar, and their color began to distort. The orange turned pale, and a blinding white began to pulse from within. It was a light, that didn't seem to belong to this world. My companions retreated with me, their eyes wide above the cloths covering their faces. The heat was unbearable, but it was the light that frightened us. And the sound, the screams inside had ceased. But it wasn't a silence of death. It was a silence of expectation. The very roar of the fire seemed to be being muffled by something. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold of the night. It was a chill of something primal, something that was breaking the rules of reality right in front of me. I wanted to run, but my feet were nailed to the ground. I still held the empty matchbox in my hand, and my knuckles were white from how hard I was gripping it. Suddenly, the sound disappeared completely. Think about what I'm saying. It's not that the fire diminished, it's that the sound of the fire vanished. The deafening roar of the flames was simply cut off, as if someone had turned off the world's volume. I looked to the side and saw one of my companions shouting something at me, pointing at the fire. I could see his mouth moving, his expression of panic, but I heard nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was a vacuum. The only sound was my own breathing, heavy and loud inside my head, and the blood pulsing in my ears, and the fire was still there, mute. The flames danced without music, without crackling, without consuming. The wood of the carpentry shop was being bathed in that silent fire, but it wasn't turning black. It wasn't turning to ash. I felt my stomach churn. The hatred I felt gave way to a type of fear I didn't even know existed, a fear of the impossible. And then the fire stopped. It didn't go out. It froze. The flames became static in the air, like sculptures of orange and white glass. I swear on what is most sacred to me, they stopped moving. Time stopped. The heat disappeared. The air suddenly turned cold. I could see the tip of a flame, suspended in the air, perfectly still. I dropped the matchbox. It fell to the ground without a sound. One of my men fell to his knees, his hands on his head. The other simply turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the alley like a ghost. I was left alone, alone before that scene that my mind refused to process. And it was in the center of that frozen fire, right where the white light was most intense, that I saw him. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't the smoke creating shapes. It was a man standing calmly inside the inferno. He was not being burned. He was the source of the white light. I couldn't make out his face clearly. The light emanating from him was too strong, but at the same time, it didn't hurt my eyes. It was a light that seemed alive. He was dressed in clothes that seemed to be made of that same light. He was standing still, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled my spine, that he was looking directly at me. Omar, the man who went there to kill, the man who threw the gasoline. He was seeing me. I didn't feel anger from him. I didn't feel judgment. I felt something much worse. I felt that he knew me. I felt that he saw through my hatred, through my convictions, and saw the worm that I was inside. My legs gave way. I fell to my knees on the dirt, unable to look away, and the absolute silence continued. Then he spoke, but it wasn't with a voice. No human voice could have pierced that silence. It was a direct communication, a thought planted inside my skull, but one that resonated in my chest like thunder. I heard it inside me, but with more clarity than if he had shouted in my ear. It was few words. He didn't accuse me. He didn't threaten me. He simply said, "This house is mine. You cannot destroy it." The voice, or whatever it was not angry. It was firm. It was a statement of fact, like a king saying the sky is blue. There was no room for discussion. And then he said something that broke my soul into 1,000 pieces. He said, "I know what you did, but I am here for you." For me? For me? The arsonist? The murderer? The contradiction of that was so violent that I felt a physical pain, as if a spear had pierced my stomach. I tried to scream, tried to say, "Who are you?" But my mouth wouldn't open. I was paralyzed, kneeling in the dirt, crying without realizing the tears were streaming. The man of light took a step forward. He moved from within the frozen fire to the threshold of the door, and when he stepped outside, the fire behind him dissolved. It didn't go out with smoke. It simply disappeared, like a light that is turned off at the switch. 1 second, there was a silent inferno. The next, there was only the night, the strong smell of pure gasoline, not smoke. The wood was intact, and that man standing in front of me. The silence was broken. I could hear the world again. I heard the distant sound of traffic. I heard my own choked breathing, and I heard the low groans of the people inside the carpentry shop who now also saw what I saw. The door was open, and there he was. The light around him dimmed a little, enough for me to see his eyes, and that's when I completely fell apart. They were not eyes of anger. They were eyes of deep sadness, a sadness that seemed to carry the weight of everything. He looked at me like a father looks at a child who has become terribly lost. I could no longer hold his gaze. I lowered my head and squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the blow, waiting for the judgment, the punishment, the lightning bolt that would split me in two. I deserved it. I had gone there to kill, moved by a hatred that now seemed so small, so stupid in the face of that presence. I was an insect. I gripped the dirt with my hands, feeling the rough grains, trying to hold on to something real, because my mind was shattering. Everything I believed, everything that defined me as Omar, the righteous man, the zealous, all of it turned to dust in less than a minute. I was nothing. I was a pathetic murderer who was interrupted not by men, but by that. I was naked in front of him. Every sin, every dark thought, every act of cruelty I had ever committed in the name of my faith, all of it was exposed under that light. And the only thing I could feel was shame. A shame so deep it made me want the ground to open up and swallow me. I lifted my eyes just one more time, trembling. He was still there, standing in the doorway. The people from the church were beginning to get up behind him, looking at me over the shoulders of that luminous figure. No one was yelling at me. No one was cursing me. They seemed as frightened and amazed as I was. The man of light looked at them, then looked back at me. He said nothing more. He just looked at me for a long time. And then he turned and went into the carpentry shop. The moment he crossed the threshold, the light disappeared. He was gone, and I was left alone in the dark alley, kneeling on the gasoline-soaked ground, with the smell of the fuel rising and impregnating my tear-wet face. The church door remained open. The fire was gone. The wood was intact. If it weren't for the smell of gasoline and my soul being turned inside out, it would have been as if none of it had happened. I don't know how long I stayed there, kneeling. Minutes? An hour? The world had lost its meaning. My limbs were heavy, as if made of lead. I tried to get up, but my legs wouldn't obey. The man who had run off didn't come back. The one who had fallen to his knees had also fled at some point. I didn't even notice. I was completely alone with the echo of that voice in my head. I am here for you. I wanted it to be a lie. I wanted to wake up and discover it had all been a feverish nightmare, a hallucination caused by the gasoline fumes. But the smell of the fuel was real, and the sight of that intact door, with no burn marks, was proof that my mind hadn't invented it. The impossible had just happened, and I was the witness. The hatred that brought me there had evaporated, but it wasn't replaced by peace. It was replaced by a terrifying emptiness, a vacuum where all my certainties used to be. Finally, with an effort that seemed to take all the energy I had left, I stood up. My clothes were dirty with earth and gasoline. I felt filthy, inside and out. I looked one more time at the open door of the carpentry shop. The faint lights of the candles still glowed inside, and I could hear the low sound of crying. They were no longer screams of terror. It was a cry of relief, of shock. I didn't know. My first instinct was to run. Run far away from there, go back to my house, lock myself in my room, and try to forget the face of light and the sad eyes. But I couldn't. It was as if an invisible magnet held me to that place. I had to know. I needed to know. What had happened there? Who was that man? What had they done to summon him? Or what had I done to make him appear to me? That "for you" wouldn't leave my head. So I took a step, and then another. I was walking toward the door of the church that, minutes before, I had tried to reduce to ashes. Every step was agony. I expected that, at any moment, someone would come out of there with a knife or a piece of wood to kill me. It would be fair. I deserved it. I reached the threshold. The smell of gasoline was nauseating there. I stopped at the entrance, afraid to look inside. I didn't belong in that place. I was the monster, the enemy. But the low crying continued, and now I also heard a male voice speaking softly in prayer. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was one of supplication and gratitude. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and went in. I was expecting anything: anger, accusation, violence. What I didn't expect was what I saw. The place was small, much smaller than I imagined. The floor was packed earth, the walls raw wood. There were maybe 15 people there, elderly, women, a few small children. They were all huddled in a corner, around an older man with a gray beard, who I assumed was the pastor. And they weren't looking at me. They were all looking at the center of the room, at the exact spot where the man of light had been before he disappeared. They were in a state of shock, awestruck. No one seemed to notice my presence at the door. I was standing there, the arsonist, reeking of gasoline, and they didn't even look at me. It was as if I had become invisible. I stood there in the shadow, near the door, watching those people I came to kill, and they were praying, giving thanks. I felt like the smallest human being on earth. Then, slowly, the older man, the pastor, turned his head. Our eyes met. I braced for the scream. I braced for him to point his finger at me and shout, "Murderer!" My whole body tensed, ready to receive the attack I knew I deserved. But he didn't scream. He just looked at me. His eyes were red from crying, but in them I saw no hatred. I saw confusion, and maybe something else, something I couldn't identify at the time. He stood up slowly, his body still trembling from the shock. The other people followed his gaze, and one by one they all turned to me, standing at the entrance. The silence returned, but now it was a heavy, human silence. The children hid behind their mothers' skirts. The men looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. And there I was, standing, unable to say a word, with the smell of my crime betraying me. The pastor took a step toward me. I instinctively recoiled, my back hitting the wall next to the door. I wanted to say, "I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't understand." But my throat was closed. He stopped a few feet from me. He looked me up and down, seeing my clothes, my dirty hands. He took a deep breath, and I saw the exact moment that the fear in his eyes gave way to understanding. He understood who I was. He understood what I had done. He looked at the floor of the doorway, where the gasoline still glistened in the candlelight, and then looked back at me. I expected condemnation. I wished for condemnation. It would have been easier. But he just said, his voice hoarse with emotion, You saw him too, didn't you?" The question hit me like a punch. He didn't ask, "What did you do?" He asked, "What did you see?" I couldn't answer. I just nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from, I don't know what. They were from something breaking inside me. The pastor looked at his small flock, and then at me again. And then he did the most illogical, most insane thing I could imagine. He opened his arms. He didn't grab a chair to break over my head. He didn't call the other men to restrain me. He opened his arms in a clear gesture of invitation. I stared at him, incredulous. My mind couldn't process it. This was the man whose house I tried to burn. This was the man whose family and friends I tried to murder. And he was offering me a hug? The smell of gasoline was the proof of my hatred, and his reaction was the proof of something I didn't understand. Who was he? I finally managed to whisper, my voice coming out scratched and weak. The pastor smiled, a tired smile, but a real one. "It was Jesus," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Our Lord. He protected us." And then he said something that echoed what the voice in my head had said, "And it seems he brought you here." I couldn't take it. The strength simply left me. My knees buckled, and I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the dirt floor, in the middle of the puddle of gasoline. I put my face in my hands and began to sob. It wasn't a silent cry. It was a loud, guttural wail, the sound of a man breaking in half. I cried for the hatred I had carried, for the blindness that had guided me, and for the forgiveness I was seeing in front of me, which I could not, in any way, comprehend. I stayed there, huddled on the floor, drowning in my own crying. I was a pathetic sight. The smell of gasoline rose from me, mixed with the cold sweat of fear and the salt of my tears. I was filthy. I felt toxic. I expected them to leave me there, crying my shame, or to drag me out and call the authorities. But the pastor came closer. I saw him through my fingers. He crouched down beside me. I flinched instinctively, like a stray dog expecting a kick. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the pain, the heavy hand of justice I deserved. I could smell him, a smell of wood and honest sweat, mixed with the smell of my gasoline. And then I felt a touch on my shoulder. It wasn't a slap. It wasn't a push. It was a hand, a firm but gentle hand, resting on my trembling shoulder. I opened my eyes, shocked. The pastor was crouching there, so close I could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He didn't look like a man who had just nearly been burned alive. He looked sad, sad for me. The other people in the church were still grouped together, watching. No one said anything. An older woman, her face covered in wrinkles and a scarf on her head, began to cry softly, not from fear, but from, I don't know. It seemed like pity. Pity for me. That was harder to bear than hatred. Hatred, I understood. Hatred was my native tongue. But this silent compassion while I reeked of my own crime? It was like being hit by something I couldn't see. I looked at the children. They were no longer hiding. They were just looking at me, with that frightened curiosity that children have. I tried to speak, my voice breaking. I came. I couldn't say the word kill. "I know what you came to do," the pastor said, his voice low, almost a whisper. His hand was still on my shoulder. "I heard you outside. I heard the gasoline." He paused and then said, "But he heard too, and he decided that your life was worth more than your hatred." Those words. Your life was worth more than your hatred. No one had ever told me anything like that. My entire life was built on the value of my hatred, the value of my zeal, my righteousness. And now, in my darkest and most shameful moment, this man I tried to destroy was telling me I had value, despite it. I shook my head, unable to accept. No. I didn't know what to say. The pastor squeezed my shoulder lightly. "You are a man who has just met Jesus," he said simply, "and that changes everything." He didn't ask me to convert. He didn't hand me a book. He didn't make me recite a prayer. He just stated a fact, in the same way the man of light had stated that the house was his. It was a reality that had happened to me, whether I understood it or not. The pastor then looked at his people and said, "Give him some water." A young woman ran to the back and returned with a metal mug of water. She approached me hesitantly, her eyes lowered, and held out the mug. I looked at the water, then at her, then at the pastor. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold it. I, the arsonist, receiving water from the hands of my victims. That was the first sip of water I took as a dead man, The Omar who entered that alley no longer existed. They had me sit on a wooden bench at the back, far from the gasoline-soaked door. No one spoke to me. They gathered again in the center of the room, and the pastor began to speak to them. He spoke softly, his voice thick with emotion, about what they had just witnessed, about the miracle, about the protection. I just sat there, huddled, just listening. I felt like a wounded animal that had been dragged into a warm house, not understanding why it wasn't being kicked back out into the storm. Every word of faith they spoke seemed to increase the weight of my own darkness. They were thanking their God, Jesus, for saving them from me. I was the monster in their story, and yet they gave me water. They gave me a place to sit. The smell of gasoline was still unbearable, but they didn't seem to mind. They were too preoccupied with the presence that had just left. After a while, the meeting ended. The people began to leave, one by one, in silence. They had to go back to their homes in the darkness, pretending nothing extraordinary had happened, so as not to attract attention. As they passed me, some looked at me sideways. I couldn't meet their eyes. I kept my head down, looking at the empty metal mug in my trembling hands. I expected everyone to leave and for the pastor to finally hand me over. But when the room was empty, with just me and him, the pastor, whose name was Elias, sat on the bench next to me. Not too close, but close enough for me to feel his presence. We sat in silence for a long time. I had nothing to say. Sorry seemed like a joke. I don't know what happened, was the truth, but it wasn't enough. Finally, he spoke. What are you going to do now, son? The word son cut me. He was old enough to be my father, but coming from him, in that context, it sounded like something from another world. I shook my head. I don't know, I mumbled. I can't go back. Go back where? To my house? To my old life? To the men who sent me? How could I explain what happened? That I failed because a man made of light appeared in the middle of the fire? They would kill me, or have me committed as insane. And, more importantly, I looked at my hands. I couldn't feel the hatred anymore. The fire that had moved me my entire life had gone out. What was left in its place was just ashes and a deep fear of the unknown. I have nowhere to go, I said, and it was the most honest truth I had ever spoken. Pastor Elias was quiet again. He looked at the center of the room where the light had shone brightest. I didn't know where to go either when he found me. He said softly, I was an angry man. I drank. I beat my children. My life was garbage. He looked at me, and his eyes seemed to see right through me. No one finds him when they are ready, Omar. We find him when we are broken. And you? He gestured to me, to my clothes reeking of gasoline. You are truly broken. He stood up. You can't stay here. The smell of gasoline will attract attention when dawn comes, but I know a place. Come. I didn't move. Trust him? Me? I was the enemy. Why? I asked, my voice weak. Why are you helping me? I tried to kill you. Elias stopped at the door and looked back. I am not helping you, he said. The one who stopped you from killing me is the same one who stops me from hating you now. I have no choice. He is in charge. I followed him. What else could I do? I was a ghost, following another man through dark alleys I had never seen before. Every step was heavy. The smell of gasoline followed me like a cloud, and I felt marked, as if everyone in the city could smell my sin. Elias said nothing. He just walked in front of me, a quick and silent shadow. We arrived at a small basement under a bakery that had not yet opened. The place smelled of yeast and mold. There was a simple cot in the corner, and a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. You can stay here, he said. Wash yourself. There's water and soap over there. He pointed to a bucket and a rough bar of soap. Don't leave for any reason. Tomorrow night I will bring food. I just nodded, unable to form words. He handed me a piece of stale bread he took from his pocket. My fingers touched his. They were warm. I was ice cold. He was about to leave, but stopped at the door. I thought he would finally say something, a word of condemnation, a demand, but he just looked at me with that same compassionate sadness. "Don't try to understand everything tonight," he said, his voice tired. "You won't be able to. Your mind will try to tell you it was a trick, that you imagined it. It wasn't." He took a deep breath. "What you saw was real. His name is Jesus, and he likes this kind of work." "What kind of work?" I mumbled, my voice hoarse. Pastor Elias gave a half-smile. "Fires. He likes to walk into fires, especially the ones that are inside us." He closed the door, and I heard the sound of a light lock from the outside. I was alone in the dark, smelling of yeast, gasoline, and the echo of those words. I undressed. The clothes were heavy, soaked with the fuel of my hatred. I threw them in a corner, wanting to see them burn, but now I was afraid of fire. I took the cold water and the rough soap and began to scrub myself. I scrubbed my skin hard, angrily, as if I could rip off not just the smell, but the memory of what I was. I scrubbed until my skin was red and raw, but it was no use. The smell was ingrained. Or maybe it was no longer on my skin, but in my mind. I could smell the gasoline, but underneath it, I could smell that white light, a smell that wasn't a smell, something like ozone and peace. I dried myself with an old cloth and lay down on the cot. I was exhausted. My body ached, but I knew I wouldn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night and the entire next day staring at the peeling concrete ceiling of that basement. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the silent fire, the frozen flames, the face I couldn't see clearly, but that knew me completely, and the eyes, the sad eyes that did not condemn me. I replayed the voice inside my head. "I am here for you." I didn't understand. I didn't understand forgiveness. I didn't understand grace. I only understood zeal and punishment. I had gone there to be the judge and executioner, and I ended up being the one judged and forgiven. The contradiction was so vast that my brain stopped trying to fight it. I didn't pray. I didn't know how. I just lay there, broken, floating in the void my certainties had left behind. I was Omar. But who was Omar now? As promised, Elias returned the next night. The sound of the key in the lock made me jump. I was huddled on the cot, hungry, but the stale bread was still untouched beside me. I couldn't eat. He came in carrying a bowl of hot soup and more bread. The smell of the food made me nauseous, but I accepted it. "You need to eat," he said, sitting on a wooden crate. He didn't ask how I was. He knew. He watched me eat in silence. I ate slowly, mechanically, each spoonful feeling like it weighed a ton. After long minutes, I finally asked what had been burning inside me since he left me. What? What happens now? I didn't know what I was asking. If I would be turned in, if I would have to join them, if I could just disappear. I was in limbo. Elias finished eating his own bread. "Now," he said, "you have a choice." He looked at me seriously. "You can try to forget what you saw. You can go back to your old life, make up a story about how you failed, and try to live with what you know. Or," he paused, and his eyes seemed to shine in the dim light of the bulb, "or you can learn about the one who saved you. You can try to understand why he appeared to you in the midst of your hatred." I said nothing. The first option was impossible. I could never forget. I could close my eyes and see the frozen fire. I could smell the gasoline and the silence. Going back was impossible. The Omar they knew was dead, burned from the inside out by a white light. I began. "I don't know how." He nodded, as if expecting this. "No one knows at first." He took something from inside his coat. It was a small, worn-covered book. "This isn't allowed," he said, placing it in my hand. "Read it in secret. Start with the Gospels. It's his story." I held the book. It was heavy, much heavier than its size suggested. I opened it to a random page. The words looked strange, yet familiar. "What do I do?" I asked him, feeling like a lost child. "You read," he said, "and you talk to him, just as you are, with your anger, your confusion, your shame. Just talk. He's listening. He's the one who brought you to this basement. And then he said something that marked me. The fire you brought wasn't yours, Omar. It was the same fire that burned in me. But the fire he brought, that one, is for you. He left me there for days. Every night, he brought food and water, sat with me for a few minutes, sometimes in silence, sometimes answering my hesitant questions. I read compulsively, hidden in that moldy basement. I read about the man named Jesus. And the more I read, the less I understood with my mind, but the more something inside me agreed. I read about him forgiving people no one would forgive. I read about him touching the untouchables. And I read about him speaking of a love that was stronger than hate, stronger than the law. And on every page, I saw the sad eyes I met in the fire. I saw the man who offered me water when I deserved death. I didn't have a second vision. I didn't hear his voice again, but I didn't need to. His presence was ingrained in those words, and it was ingrained in the inexplicable compassion of that pastor. I can't say when the change happened. It wasn't a lightning bolt. It was more like ice melting slowly inside. I would read his words and cry. I cried from anger sometimes. Why hadn't he stopped me sooner? Why did he let my hatred grow so much? Other times I cried from gratitude, a gratitude so overwhelming it left me breathless. I was grateful he had appeared at that moment, that he hadn't let me cross the final line. I stopped trying to understand the why of it all with my old logic. My old logic burned in that silent fire. I began to accept the simple fact. It happened. I, Omar, the zealot, the persecutor, the arsonist, had an encounter. And that was all. The rest was detail. I stopped fighting the memory. I began to just listen to it. One night, Elias came and he wasn't carrying food. He opened the door and said, "It's time." I got up from the cot. The book was hidden under the makeshift mattress. Time for what? I asked. I had gotten used to the basement. The world outside was the place where the old Omar lived. I didn't know if I wanted to go back there. Time to live, he said simply. You can't hide forever. He didn't save you for you to live in a hole. I followed him out, up the steps into the alley. The night was cold, and the fresh air hit my face. It was the first time in days. I looked up at the sky, at the stars. They looked different, sharper. I felt painfully alive. I was no longer the man who entered that basement. I no longer had hatred. I no longer had certainties. I just had that night, that smell of bread baking in the bakery above us, and the haunting memory of a white light. I still live in Kerman. I have another name now. I do something else for work. To my old leaders, to the men who walked with me that night, I am a missing person. A coward who fled when the plan went wrong. They never knew what really happened. They could never believe it. Sometimes, when I smell a match being struck, or the smell of gasoline at a station, my heart stops for a second. The chill returns. I close my eyes, and, for a split second, I see it. The fire stopped in midair. The absolute silence. The sad eyes looking at me from within the flames. I never saw him again. I never heard that voice inside my head again. Not like that. It was one time, a single, terrible time. I don't go to Elias's church. It's too dangerous for them and for me. I pray alone. I read my worn book, hidden. I don't have all the answers. In fact, I think I have fewer answers today than I did before. I don't know why he appeared to me. I don't know why he chose me, the man who hated him, instead of appearing to so many good men who seek him. I don't understand divine logic. I don't understand mercy. I only know that on that night, I went to set a fire to destroy, and I ended up being consumed by a fire that builds. The experience simply happened, and then it ceased, just as it began. And I am here with this mark on my soul, unable to explain anything, just knowing that it was real. What we learn from Omar's story is simple, but profound. Neither fire nor hatred can stop the power of Jesus' love. When all seemed lost, that is exactly where the miracle began. And now, the question is for you. Have you ever experienced something you can't explain, but that changed your life forever? Share your experience or your opinion about this testimony here in the comments. Your story might touch someone today. If this video spoke to you, subscribe to the channel right now and activate the notification bell. It's very important so you don't miss any new transformative testimonies like this one. Don't leave yet. The next video you need to watch is already appearing on your screen. Click and continue with us. May God bless you. Until next time.